Okay, so we're just going to pick up where we left off yesterday, ladies and gentlemen, with the notes. You should have your note catcher in your Google Classroom. Again, ladies and gentlemen, we're just picking up where we left off from yesterday, which I believe we left off at this slide. If I am wrong, please somebody correct me now.
You are correct.
Okay, fantastic. So did we or did we not actually talk about this? Does anybody remember?
The bell rang just as you put it up. So we did
Fantastic.
not
All right,
talk about it.
cool. So we will pick up here. Thank you very much. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, yesterday, so I'm going to pick up where we left off yesterday a little bit. We had looked at the level of organization. So, I want to kind of bring this to mind because we had just talked about this in our do now question. These are the levels of organization inside of the biosphere. The least complex is the individual. The most complex is the biosphere. And then again, we are looking right here. Community is more complex than a population because the higher up you go in this list, the more complicated it becomes. Okay. So a population is less complex, or you could say a community is more complex than a population. And again, I want to bring you back to these diagrams. And a population is a group of one type of organism. Okay. So, for example, in the picture right here, we see that we have these three little pine trees. They're all the same species, they are a population. Down here, we have a picture of a community. We have the pine trees, but we also have these oak trees in the back, and we have this kind of bush over here. And if you look inside the tree there, we see some squirrels, and I have a robin, and I have a deer. So, in a community, which brings us back to what we're talking about today, boop, see how, look at that. Look at me. So cool. A community is a group of populations that all live together in a defined area. So, for example, here at Oak Park, when I look out of my window, I look at one of the courtyards that are here between the wings at the high school. So when I look out, I see some pine trees. There's a couple of deciduous trees. There's some bushes. There's also, obvious. I'm guessing. I mean, I haven't gone out there and done a survey. I'm guessing there's bugs that live out there. We get some songbirds. We definitely have some squirrels. And this time of year, we even have geese out in the courtyard. So I have a little courtyard community. There are a bunch of different populations: squirrels, birds, trees, different grasses, different bushes, different flowers, different birds, that all live together in a defined area, specifically the courtyard. Okay? If I want to look at things in terms of an ecosystem, okay, so there's another word, ecosystem. The ecosystem is a bunch of communities and the physical non-living parts of the environment. So now in an ecosystem, I am going to be including the biotic, the living things, the living populations, the living communities, along with the abiotic, the physical non living parts. So, what is an abiotic component? Temperature, water, air, humidity, the rocks, the soil. These are all things that we have interactions with, but they're non living. Okay? Because obviously the tree interacts with the soil, it needs to get the nutrients from it, but the soil itself is not alive. We all need air to breathe, but the air is not alive. We all need water to drink, but the water is not alive. It is an abiotic, it is a non living part of our environment, part of our ecosystem. Questions or issues? I should probably actually pull up my chat because I see something blinking. Okay, nope, that's just a question about something else that I can address later. All right. There we go. Sorry about that. All right, so an ecosystem. An ecosystem, once again, it's all of the living. Sometimes you'll hear me say biotic, living, biotic, same thing. And the non living factors, again, non living, abiotic. Another word for non living is abiotic. So all of the living, biotic, and non living, abiotic factors in a particular place. An ecosystem can be very, very large, but it can also be very, very small. Ecosystems just need to have a grouping of some populations or a grouping of communities and some biotic and abiotic factors. So, for example, if you were walking through the woods and you happened to see a fallen tree that was dead and the log was rotting, you could say, oh, okay, that rotting log is a community. You would probably have a lot of bugs that live there. You would have some fungus that live there. My volume dropped. My volume is at max, so I'm not sure what's going on. I will talk a little louder, I guess. Um, a koi pond, for those of you who maybe, like, have ever had koi in your backyard, or maybe if you have seen a koi pond, like when you're out someplace at some botanical garden or whatever. But something really as large, we can even say that like Lake Michigan is an ecosystem, and Lake Michigan is a huge lake. So we can talk about the ecosystem of Lake Michigan. But again, it can be simple as like a clump of dirt. Because inside that dirt, you're going to have different bugs, you're going to have some bacteria, maybe some fungal spores, moisture, etc. Okay? All right, so again, ecosystem, more complicated than communities because we have all these communities and the non living portion. All right, so the next thing that we have, the next level of organization that exists within the biosphere is a biome. So this is a map of the 10 major biomes in the world. So we have tundra, tropical rainforest, what we call a chaparral. It's you can see it here in California and over here. Grasslands, Tasia, desert, polar, and right here in the United States, you can kind of see like Michigan's little, hand print mitten sticking up. We are part of the temperate deciduous forest. So each one of these words has a meaning, and we'll talk about those as we go through different biomes. But it's always nice to know what biome you're in. So right there in the brown, here's the United States. Obviously, we can see Michigan sticking up. Little handprint that we are. We are a temperate deciduous forest, what's it called, biome. Now these biomes are defined by climate. Okay, so climate is your weather patterns, what kind of weather patterns you've had over the last 20 or so years. They are defined by specific species of plants and animals that live there that have adaptations for living there. So, for example, the type of animals and plants that we can see in a tropical rainforest down here in Brazil is going to be completely different than the animals and plant species that we are going to see over here in northern Africa in the Sahara, in the desert biome. Every biome has its own climate, its own plants, its own species um, that are adapted to that particular area. Okay. Here is an interesting thought. And Miss Decker, have you always more or less lived in Michigan?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So let me ask you. This is for any of my students. If you were to look out of the window and see a squirrel, what color is it?
Black.
Black. Anybody else?
A brownish color. Well, brown.
Do you
And
mostly see black squirrels or the brownish ones?
the brownish ones, yeah.
brown. Oh, interesting. So, Miss Decker, if you have always lived in Michigan, you can probably attest to this. When we were younger, and I'm guessing you're right around my age, I'm 48, so probably somewhere in that ballpark. So we're probably members of the same generation. When we were kids, when we looked out the window, we never saw black squirrels. Down here in the Metro Detroit area, it was always we call them red squirrels, but really they're the kind of the brownish ones. Nowadays, at least when I look out my window, I see way more black squirrels than the red brownish ones. What's happened since the 30 years since I was in high school? If biomes are defined by climate, species, and plants, what has changed here in Michigan where
Climate
this
change.
climate change? Exactly. So as we see changes in climates, and by the way, the climate hasn't changed that much, but it has changed. Okay? As we see changes in climate, we are going to see changes in species. So, yeah, that's just one of those weird things that I have seen in my lifetime that probably Miss Decker has noticed as well. Because it used to be that if I wanted to see a black squirrel, and I'm not being funny when I say this, like when you would travel to other parts of the country, and for us specifically, it would be further north. Like if you went up to Alpena, Boyne, Traverse City, like the places that are in northern Michigan, you would see these black squirrels. And I know myself, I would always be like, "Oh wow, look, it's a black squirrel! Woo, how weird!" Like that was kind of my reaction because I was a weirdo and I was in high school and whatever. But in the last 30 or so years since I have graduated from high school, yes, I graduated in 1990. The squirrel population here in Michigan, in southeastern Michigan, in the Detroit metro area, has changed because we've seen some climate change. So, as you have a change in climate, you do see a changing of species, a changing of plants, and those sorts of things. Anyways, just thought I'd mention it because it was one of those things that I've always find interesting that you can actually see science happening if you pay attention long enough. All right, so moving on. Biodiversity. Oof, another complicated word. So all biodiversity really is all of the different forms and flavors of life that are available in a particular area. Okay, so we have a variety of organisms, we have a variety of plants, and these different organisms, whether they're animals or plants or fungus, inside of them all have genetic diversity. We've already talked about genetic diversity, how that DNA sequence that makes different proteins, that order of your nucleotides, even though you and I and we're all humans, all of us are a little bit different, right? So maybe you have hazel eyes, I have brown eyes. Maybe you have very dark skin, maybe you have very light skin. Maybe you have a wide nose, maybe you have a thin nose. Maybe you're really, really tall, or maybe like me, you're kind of on the short side. Okay? So like we all, even though we're all humans, every single one of us has a little bit of genetic diversity. Same thing with your dogs, right? Like every single one of us, if we had a dog, maybe we even all have the same breed of dog. Maybe every single one of us has, I don't know, a Yorkshire Terrier. Every single one of our dogs, even though every single one is a dog and every single one is a Yorkshire Terrier, every single one is going to have a slight difference. Those slight genetic differences are what we are talking about when we talk about biodiversity. We are not only talking about the different types of species, plants, animals, fungus, bacteria, etc. We're also talking about within those species the genetic diversity. Ecological diversity will refer to the different ecosystems in a region. Now, earlier I had said that Michigan is a temperate deciduous forest. But if you've lived in Michigan for as long as I have, as long as Miss Decker has, and heck, even you guys, I'm sure they still cover this in elementary school, you know that southeastern Michigan, most of this land that we're currently on, does anybody know what it used to be before we came and started farming it? By we, I mean like the people who colonized the area, obviously. Does anybody know what this area in southeastern Michigan used to be before the colonists and the settlers came?
The rainforest, right?
Well, we call it a temperate deciduous forest, but specifically like Oak Park, specifically most of Detroit. Does anybody know what this area used to be? It wasn't a forest. Anybody? Huh?
Water.
There was a lot of water here. Yeah, this was swampland, swamps and marshes. And it wasn't until um, the colonists came west, because like if you've ever listened to this fight song for University of Michigan, they're like the heroes of the West. Like this used to be the western edge of the U.S. territory, believe it or not, because further west from us that actually used to belong to Mexico. But that's a whole history lesson. When the colonists first came to Michigan, this area of southeastern Michigan was pretty much swamps and grasslands. So I do want to point out that there can be different ecosystems in a region, right? So like yeah, like right now we have, if you're downtown, right, there's rivers, right? There's the Detroit River. We have a river ecosystem. Um if you go into some parts of southwestern Michigan, southeastern Michigan, the reason why we have a tendency to flood a lot, like if you've noticed over the last couple of summers, there's been a lot of heavy rainfall and there's been a lot of flooding in different areas. Yeah, that's an infrastructure problem, but it's also because this area used to be swampland and we just came and drained the swamps so that we could create civilization here. Anyways, so every ecosystem in a particular region, even though we're mostly temperate deciduous forest, we do have some other mini ecosystems in the area, right? So, like, we do have a lake ecosystem. We have lots of lake ecosystems here in Michigan. We have river ecosystems. We have swampy or marsh ecosystems. But, again, an ecosystem, collection of communities, along with the abiotic factors. If you look at tropical rainforest, so this is going to be like sub-Saharan Africa. This is going to be Brazil, like in the Amazon, the Congo, places like that. Tropical rainforests have the highest biodiversities of all of the biomes. In other words, they have the absolute most genetic diversity, the most special diversity out of any of the biomes. Interestingly enough, there are big pharmaceutical companies that will go in and buy in Brazil, in Africa, in South America, in Central America. There are pharmaceutical companies from all over the world that will go in and buy a few hundred acres of what's it called? Rainforest. And the reason why is because a lot of the new medicines coming out aren't really all that new. They're coming from these species that literally are just now being studied. All right, so what are factors that affect ecosystems? We've already talked about this a little bit. We have our abiotic factors. These are the non-living factors in an ecosystem. So anything that can affect this ecosystem that's non-living: soil, pollution, natural disasters, climate, rainfall, water, anything that's non-living that can affect the ecosystem is an abiotic factor. On the other hand, we have the biotic factors. Again, these are the living things that affect ecosystems. So, you have, like, for example, you have the worm, right? It can affect the soil. You have the trees, definitely affects the soil. Trees also affect the atmosphere. I just want to point that out, like, because carbon dioxide goes in, oxygen comes out. Yay, trees. Wolves can affect the ecosystem because obviously they're predators. They will eat things. Side note, there has literally never been a case of wolves attacking humans that wasn't provoked by a human. I just want to point that out. Like, people are always like, oh, wolves are so evil. Wolves tend to avoid us, just FYI. So if you're ever in the woods and you see a wolf, go in the other direction. They won't follow you. Never has happened. Just want to point that out. I don't know why people have a problem with wolves. By the way, they are the predecessors of dogs, very, very closely related. All right. So, factors that affect ecosystems. So we have biotic and abiotic factors, and they are going to determine two things. They are going to determine survival. Do you live? Do you die? They are going to decide growth. How big, how small, how much does your population expand, or how much does it contract? Biotic and abiotic factors control two things: survival and growth of individuals and ultimately of the ecosystem itself. For example, we have a bullfrog, pretty popular here in Michigan. A lot of them exist in our ponds and lakes. Biotic factors that affect bullfrogs is the availability of food. How many insects are available? Other species that might compete with the bullfrog for food or space. Okay, so maybe there's not enough food. They're not going to have a big population. Maybe there are some birds in the area or fish in the area that are out competing this poor little frog for food. Biotic factors can affect him. Abiotic factors that affect bullfrogs are water availability, temperature. Oddly enough, we are seeing, and this is kind of one of those weird things down in Florida. You know, you always hear like Florida man. With climate change and temperatures being warmer, one of the things that they're seeing with the Florida alligator is they're worried about having too many females. Because obviously, in order to sustain a population, you need both females and males. How you determine the sex of many reptiles is by the temperature of the nest. So one of the things that we're seeing with our reptile populations, as the temperature is getting warmer overall in Florida, we're seeing a higher level of female reptiles being born versus males. And obviously, if you have all females, you can't sustain that population. Anyways, these are again biotic and abiotic factors that are going to be controlling ecosystems. Again, biotic, that is the living stuff; abiotic, the non-living stuff. Oh, sorry, went too far. All right, so when I have a population, when I have an organism, we say that all organisms have a habitat. Okay, so a habitat is the place where that population lives. So for example, like I'm a city girl, so my habitat is a city. Maybe if I'm an ant, my habitat might be my anthill. We have squirrels' nests, beaver dams, marshes, etc. A habitat is like the house of an organism in the ecosystem. Habitats may include both biotic and abiotic factors. Okay, so a habitat is where an organism lives inside of their ecosystem, inside of their biome. Issues or questions? Right. So, how do ecosystems actually form? Ecosystems, even though it doesn't seem this way, ecosystems are always changing. The problem is the changes that take place in them happen over very, very, very long periods of time. So, how they change is by a process called succession. Okay? So, this is the regular progression of a species as they replace over time. So, we can see here there is a just plain piece of land. The first thing that happens is we get a little bit of grasses, then we get a little like shrubs, more shrubs and trees, and then eventually over here, number 6, this is considered to be an old growth forest. This is what happens all of the time. And we've seen this, like if you live in the city of Detroit and you have ever been or driven through or seen, maybe actually it shouldn't necessarily even be the city of Detroit, really anywhere. If there's a house that gets abandoned, what eventually happens with the yard? You all know this. What happens? Anybody? What happens in the yard of an abandoned place? Anybody at all?
It starts dying.
Yeah, it like all of a sudden, like, it used to be a nice little grass lawn, and then all of a sudden there's some weeds, and then there's some trees, and then it's completely freaking overgrown. That is a simpler version of succession. If allowed to continue, eventually it would eventually turn into a forest. All right, so how does this actually happen? Succession, again, is really, really slow, but natural disasters or human disturbances can cause sudden changes. So, for example, not that this ever happens in Michigan, but let's just pretend if there was like some volcanic eruption that covered everything in brand new rock because lava, we would start over here at phase one, bare rock, right? And then eventually we would get mosses, grasses, perennials, etc., and so forth. Um, we saw this last summer. There was that big, it was like my Midland, Saginaw area. There was a dam that burst. If you guys recall that from the news from last summer, when that dam burst and all that water came rushing through that farmland, it literally ripped away all of the plants. So again, disasters, whatever of whatever region, can sort of reset this. So we had a lot of probably fast growing trees, forest climate in the Saginaw Midland area. When that dam burst, it sort of reset it back to a two. And now it's slowly coming back. And it's going to take years for that ecosystem to reset itself to what it was. Issues or questions? All right. So we have, oh, sorry, didn't mean to do that. We have something called primary succession. If the land has never had soil, like lava flow, maybe a glacier retreats, and you just have bare rock, the first species that populates the area is going to be the pioneer species. Those pioneer species are creating what we call primary succession. They go from bare rock and start to form soil. So a receding great glacier, bare rock underneath it. We have rock that's being exposed. Volcanic eruptions. New islands are formed from a hot spot, like in Hawaii. Um, this is going to create bare rock. So we are going to need some pioneer species. Again, 12,000 years ago, Michigan was 100% covered in glaciers. When those glaciers receded, bare rock. So in the last 12,000 years, every living thing that has developed here in Michigan has developed from an original primary succession. Lichen, which is like a moss, is a very common pioneer species, and it's basically algae and fungus. Algae and fungus, lichen, will literally eat rock, and the rock breaks down and starts to form soils. And that is the first step in creating soils and creating biodiversity. Questions or issues?
Actually, can you go back to the last slide, actually, if you don't mind?
Yeah, what's about it?
Um, I didn't get the few last parts. That was all.
Okay, right. So succession, like I said, it's slow. Usually, and again, if you look at the two diagrams, we have phase one, it would be like bare rock. That would be where our primary succession is going to start at. Natural disasters can set us back to bare rock, can set us back, however. Human disturbances can do this. I'm sure you've seen a construction site. There might have been a beautiful, lush field or forest, and they decide they're going to build a factory or a neighborhood. They come in and tear everything up, right? So whether it's a natural disaster or human disturbances, those can make sudden changes to our ecosystems, and they can do resets. So again, whether it's a phase one, bare rock, phase two, basically moss, grass, whatever, or all the way to a phase six, which is a climax forest, which is like a mature, older forest. Humans, fire, any of these things, glaciers, volcanic eruptions, can reset us back to any previous stage. But again, these will over time change. Because, like I said, 12,000 years ago, Michigan was covered in a giant freaking glacier. As that glacier retreated, it exposed bare rock, and all the beauty that you see in terms of nature here in Michigan has developed in the last 12,000 years. Are we ready to move forward? Okay. So we talked primary succession. Again, pioneer species are your lichen. These guys are going to create the soil that then can be used for the succession to continue. Secondary succession is succession, that occurs in areas that already has soil. Forest fire. Forest fire does not destroy the soil, it just destroys all the trees. It takes it down to bare soil, but we don't have to regrow the soil. In Midland, Michigan, Saginaw, Michigan, when that big dam broke and it ripped all the plants out, it still left behind the soil. So what Midland and Saginaw is seeing is secondary succession. So, for example, forest fire. Number one, you have a big, beautiful forest. Number two, wildfires like we saw out west of the last couple summers. It's been really bad fire season out west. And then eventually we will see life returning. This is secondary succession again because we don't have to build the soil. If you have to build soil using bare rock and mosses and lichen, then it is primary succession. Most of what we see anymore is secondary succession. Places that we see primary succession is more like Hawaii, volcanic areas, because you're getting covered in brand new rock. We don't see a whole lot of primary succession outside of glacier retreats or volcanic eruptions really anymore. All right, today is Tuesday, and I didn't anticipate it would take us this long to get to the notes, but that's okay. I am going to leave it here. There was a worksheet that goes off with this, but we can just start with that tomorrow. It is not that big of a deal. Let me go ahead and stop my recording.